That's on? All right. All right. Good. We'll move this out of the way a little bit. All right. Good. Let's see who we have here. I don't see her. She hasn't gotten here yet. Did someone let her know? You did let her know, beloved? All right. Do you know if she's planning on coming back to Maj? You haven't talked with her.
She did. I talked to her earlier. She was planning on it.
Acha. Where's Tratosa?
He's supposed to be coming with Seth, right?
Acha. I think I see them pulling up. In any event, I thought we would take this occasion for those of you who are waiting, anxious to get into some of this dukkha. I thought I would take this occasion to give you some broader concept of what the path is about, what initiation is all about, and also at the same time to give you a little bit of a practice to help you train your mind. Because essentially that's what it's all about, isn't it? The whole spiritual ordeal is essentially a training of the mind. And it's not even so much a training of the mind per se, in as much as it is a purification of the mind. When the mind has been purified of all of its wrong concepts, the wrong concept about one's own identity, the wrong concept about the world, and so forth and so on, when all of these wrong concepts have been purified from the mind, then the mind simply shines and reflects the reality as it is. So mind is like a mirror, if you will. And you can imagine a mirror that is covered with a lot of dust and grease and dirt does not reflect that which is the case. The mind is very similar then. And as long as the mind is obscured, covered, tainted, if you will, with all of these wrong concepts, wrong views, misunderstandings, so forth and so on, then one simply remains in the unenlightened condition. So I want you to begin to understand from the beginning of your ordeal so that you will be spared some of the confusion that has plagued others and simply arrested and cycle off the time that they could have been applying themselves on the path has been unfortunately lost in trying to get right understanding. So we're gathered today in the hopes that we can spare you as best we can some of that. And we won't be able to spare you all because it is in the nature of every secret to have the feeling that they will leap over tall buildings in a single bound. I mean, you can't help it. I understand. You look around, you see all these other rascals, you say, I can't believe it. What's wrong with these fools? This should be simple. But Bhagwan is saying simple stuff here. I don't understand. What's the problem? You know. Well, you will understand the problem. Trust me. You see. So hopefully today we can help you prepare for that. So when we're talking about spiritual development, essentially what we're talking about is the pure, thank you, beloved, the purification of the mind. And more particularly, its points of view. The mental constructs. Thoughts, feelings, emotions, etc., etc. But before we plunge into the Spanda, and let me say something about Spanda, there's many ways in defining Spanda. we've used the word spanda, but technically we're talking about many things that are added in out of the tradition in the area in which Spanda Dharma was popularized. So we're drawing on a lot of things, but Spanda, in its most fundamental sense of the word, simply means the expansion. In the condensing, contraction, if you will, reabsorption of consciousness. Spanda is the vibration of consciousness. And the Spanda yogi practice involves a one-pointed attending via attention to this whole expansion and then contraction of consciousness. Because everything that you experience is simply an expansion of consciousness. There's only one reality, and that is your consciousness. There is nothing else. Spanda Yoga, Spanda Dharma, the Spanda Karika as it is referred to in the tradition, the stanzas on the vibration, is essentially about attending to, very closely, attending to this vibration of consciousness, attending to it to the level of devotion and with great reverence. There's an element of bhakti involved, isn't it? One has to simply become devoted to the observing of this Spanda activity. When you observe it, you begin to realize certain things. You begin to recognize certain things. You begin to recognize that this whole universe of manifest experience, both gross and subtle, is a part of your own activity. You begin to recognize that you, as consciousness, are the possessor of all of the Shakti, the power that brings things into creation. You are actually the creator of your experience in every respect. The recovery of this recognition has been called the prati-abhijana. Not worry about all of these terms. You can see your sponsors. They'll give you all of that stuff. But it has been called the recognition that you are God. And essentially then, the path is purposed ultimately in the recovery of the recognition of the divinity of your own self, your divine self. To remember and to recognize, in fact, that you are God. You are God on the basis of however we describe God in all of the scriptures. God has been defined as that which creates, what else? Destroys, maintains, that's right. Yeah, veils and reveals, right, yes. Those are the 5 actions, aren't they? Somewhat, thank you, beloved. That it creates, it maintains, it destroys. And in all of those 3 basic movements, it is also concealing itself. And it also reveals itself. This revealing of itself to itself. This is grace. This is the Shakti Bhakti. the power of grace. This concealing activity that the one being is involved in has been called Maya. It creates the illusion that it is other than its real self for the purposes of having experiences. It is really quite complex. I will not bog you down in all of that. It covers its own identity. What it's saying, you see, May, is that you are God. You simply have concealed your identity as such and fallen into this feeling that you are me, and then act on that, live on that basis, etc., etc. But this very God that you are always, already are, at some point in the drama, in the lila, as they have called it in the tradition, the game, lila, that is being played, decides to undo the Maya, to recover its own recognition of self as God. And then it makes available grace. And the recovery process begins, you see. So what is true of May is true of everybody in here. The fundamental goal of the path is the recovery of the recognition of self as God. This recovery of recognition of self as God has been called, in the tradition, Mosca. I have called it the Mosca Dharma because there's a certain law governing this kind of liberation. Mosca becomes the goal and objective of all initiation, of all spiritual culture, of all spiritual development. It is to become liberated from this ignorance of self as God. So it involves a kind of undoing, doesn't it? The path is more about subtraction than addiction, adding. It's not so much what you add, it's what you must take away. Because self as God is already the case. Simply because there is nothing else but God. And the question is, of course, why aren't you having the experience of being God right now? And that's what you must find out. That is what you must undo. God realization is not a goal somewhere out in time and space. It is already the case. What is required is your recognition, your realization of that fact. So will we begin to talk about some of the means for that realization? The technical term is upaya. The means of realization of the self as God. Naturally, this means will involve the undoing then of the empirical psychological self that you have become identified as being. You have to understand the self that you really feel you are is a false sense of self. What do we call this false sense of self? Ego. Ego is this false sense of self that you are clinging to, that you're really trying to perpetuate, that you're really trying to, how do I put it? That's right, thank you, Unc Sa. want that, that's the thing that you want to go to heaven. That's the thing you want to go to Sachkhand. That's the thing you want to become enlightened. That's the thing you want to become a better human being. You understand? But this is the very thing that must be undone. So you begin to see most radically that spiritual culture has nothing to do with self-improvement in the traditional sense of the word. Are you following me? Now, many of you came to the path simply to improve yourself. This whole motive to improve yourself become counterproductive ultimately on the path. Because what are you in fact really doing in your effort to improve yourself? Fundamentally. Right. You add it on. Right? Right? You add it. You're deepening the experience of this false self, isn't you? You are working in a way that is counterproductive to your whole spiritual goal. So we'll talk about some of these means for the liberation of that sense of identity from this false self. Are you all right so far? You okay so far? And don't be shy because we're at Zenobia House. Huh? We all right. So we can relax today and make full use of the time that we have set aside for this. You see? I'm in no particular hurry here. All right. Now, we're going to be covering a lot of material that may be new to you. We certainly are not going to exhaust the subject, but we will begin. And the philosophy and metaphysics associated with the Spanda Dharma, the mystics, those geniuses who have fashioned the system, have given us a kind of typology, a kind of general outline of the various means that is available for the purposes of realization of self as God. Means by which one can recover one's recognition of self as God. However, those means are rated, graduated, if you will. There are means that are inappropriate for you. And then there are means that work for you. These means themselves are based on the degree that the individual is attached to their self-image, the ego. This is interesting, isn't it? If you are very, very much attached to your image of yourself, to that false sense of self, that ego, then you simply cannot make right use of certain means, because the means themselves are graduated on the basis of the degree of attachment that you have to this image of yourself. And most of you are very, very attached to this image that you have of yourself. It is almost, you're almost pathologically attached to it. And there are means that is available for those individuals who are pathologically attached to their egos. So there is help. There is grace for everyone. But depending upon your degree of attachment to this false sense of self, to ego, is what determines how much grace you can really receive. The form of grace that you can receive. There is a kind of grace that In the tradition of the Siddha yogis, we have called it the Shaktipat. And Shaktipat, in its most ultimate sense, is the pure, direct grace. That constitutes one of the activities of God, right? It is the grace that removes the Maya, isn't it? The Vilaya, right? The ignorance. That is one of its activities, what we call, it reveals, right? The power of revelation, grace. But this grace now, in its purest form, can only be used by those individuals who are not very attached to their false sense of self. So one of the highest means, they have called it the Anu Upaya. It's really not a means, technically, because it doesn't require any doing. Normally, in the conventional sense of when we talk about a means, we're talking about a certain doing, a kind of sadhana, aren't we? You do something. But in the Anu Upaya, there's simply no doing as such. So we pause, check them out, Guru Murti, make sure. Is he okay? Let Kunsa, all right then. Because I'm not having Guru Dasa calling me no more. I'm tired of her. In the Anu Upaya, there is simply no sadhana, no abhyasa, no meditation, no doing, no anything. The jiva, the embodied being, the embodied God, it is not in a state of deep maya. That is the kind of individual who is already sufficiently detached from the image of self. It's being separate from God. These are beings who are born in the condition of the witness. They have already become so detached from this false sense of self that their body no longer becomes the basis of their identity. Your body is the principal basis of your identity. You identify yourself most radically on the basis of this body that you have. There are those who identify themselves on the basis of what the body possesses, what the body's activities are. That's even a grosser entrapment, isn't it? That jiva, for whom the Anu Upaya is an effective means, is simply that individual who has transcended all of the lower forms of Maya and misidentification of self. They have already had the experience of not being the body. Nor are they their emotions. Because in addition to your experience of being the body, you're heavily identified with your emotions, aren't you? Right? When you say I, it's always followed by something, right? You say, I am sad, or I'm angry, don't you? You very much identify with your feelings. But what about this I? That is prior to and transcendent to any feeling. That is not your level of identification. It's self. the Jiva, you see, who is capable of responding to grace at the level of Anu-upaya. It's simply that Jiva, that soul, that being, who has already recovered their identity beyond the level of their emotions, their feelings, their likes, their dislikes. And you see, you all are simply totally governed by your likes and dislikes. Whenever something happens that you don't like, you see, you feel injured, don't you? Right? It feels as if they're doing something to me. Why are you messing with me? Right? You messing with me. Right? Because your sense of identification is based on your feelings. Emotions, and so forth and so on. And as ego, you are mightily involved in the act of making yourself feel better at the level of your body and your feelings, aren't you? Right? What we have called egoicity, right? That is what your energy is involved in. That is what your attention is involved in. All of it. All of your attention and its energies is involved in trying to somehow maintain and perpetuate that false sense of self based on that misidentification with your body and your emotions. Those rare souls who are able to respond to the Shaktipat in its purest form are simply not involved in that ordeal at all. It is their natural condition. That's how they walk around in that condition. Nor are they identified with their thoughts, because another part of your self-image, your sense of who you are, is based on your attachment and misidentification with your thinking, isn't it? Principally at the level of your opinions. You are very attached to your opinions, aren't you? You are your opinions, aren't you? Right? So you're very much still trapped in the mental level of this kind of misidentification of self, aren't you? As well. Memories are also a part of the mental contents, isn't it? Right? Your memories. Right? The memories that you have play a large role in making up your sense of self. Right? And that's also more mental material, isn't it? Right? So these become some of the fundamental forms that this misidentification of self as false self takes, isn't it? Moksha is about liberation from all of that, so that you can have the recognition of self prior to all of this. You see, what they call the experience of pure I. Pure I consciousness. The experience of I without modifications. Right? You see? Yes, beloved.
So the way that we physically view the world, that falls in this category. Right? When you see things like I'm here and everybody's out there versus the witness would see include the view of themselves. Is that correct?
The witness, you see, although not the ultimate condition, right?
This is a lower level.
Right, not the ultimate condition. It still suffers from the limitations of individuation. It still has the experience of other. You're witnessing the other. Still, aren't you? Right? So there's still one limitation, isn't it? And that is of individuation. Because a part of your identity, the most fundamental part of your sense of self, is that it is separate from others, isn't it? All right? It is there running along with all the other stuff, isn't it? It's like a thread that runs right through the whole experience, isn't it? Right? These are my feelings and not others' feelings, right? In fact, one of the things that characterizes children in their normal course of development is their inability to take other people's feelings into consideration. You see? They are so contracted that they feel whatever they feel, and you should be feeling that. So if as a child I feel like playing, Mommy, you're supposed to be feeling like playing. They cannot even conceive of you having feelings different from theirs, you see. There's some grown-ups too, beloved, who are still childish. Yes. But the point is that individuation is the basis of the feeling that there are others. And even when there are others, still there's a kind of arrested development that cannot even take others into consideration at all. I mean, it really gets very, very sick. But in any case, you see at the witnessing state, that individual's sense of identity has simply matured to a point, simply grown to a point, where it's no longer identified itself on the basis of that. Now, while it still has the perception of others, beloved, but that other is not in any way, shape, form, or fashion a basis of their sense of self. Like the others for you is a part of your definition of self. I am so-and-so's son or daughter. I am married to so-and-so. You understand how you do that? A lot of your self-identification is based on your relationships to people, things, situations, circumstances, etc. They are based on roles, right? I am a father, I'm a mother, I'm a husband, I'm a sister, I'm a son, and so forth and so on. But what are you independent of these roles? That you don't know. And what are you independent of these relationships? That you do not know. And who were you before you were your mother's son? That you don't know. There is simply a level of reality about you that is transcended and prior to all of these modifications. Isn't it? Yes, beloved.
So the task would be to find out why you created all the other roles.
Well, it's not so much to find it out in as much as it is to transcend it. But of course you will have to, in the very process of finding out, transcending it, find out a little bit more about it, you see. But you can become endlessly trapped and trying to find out, right? You must really resort ultimately to that practice that enable you to transcend it. We mustn't make the mistake of the man who's fallen in the well. You must have heard Bilal tell the story, right? 100 times. He falls in the hole. A stranger come by, he'll tell you. Drops a rope to him, beloved, you see, to pull him up. And rather than him grab the rope and be saved from his dilemma, he begins a whole series of questions. He want to know how long is this rope? You know what I mean? And what is this rope made of? And where did you buy this rope? And you know what I mean? How much did it cost? You know what I mean? And, you know, on and on and on. You know, he wants to know why you was over here in the first place. What happened to bring you by this place? I mean, he's asking all these questions. He's not doing the thing that must be done, is he? Grab the rope. You see? So when you become too lost, you know, in trying to find out what happened in the first place, then you almost always miss grabbing the rope. Now the thing is, grab the damn rope, come up, and you can ask all those questions. Can't you? Right? All of them. You know, but first get out of the hole. You see? So you put practice first and put your questions second. Just the reverse of what you all normally do. You load up with all your questions up front. Right? And you're trying to find some kind of explanation that you are capable of understanding in your fallen condition. Right? You make the presumption that you even have the capacity to understand this vast thing and place that we find ourselves. This incredible mystery. This bewilderment. You cannot understand this place and time and space that you are in. You don't have a clue. It is beyond your capacity to even understand it. How would a finite being understand that which is infinite? How can finite consciousness understand infinite consciousness? You simply can't. But there's a upaya even for that person. It's way down the list. But there is a way too for them. So not to worry. So in any event then, this first and highest level of response to grace constitutes the anu upaya. And this is where, standing in that state where you are already sufficiently free from your false sense of self, you are able to intuitively see that you are God. It is an amazing thing. The witness here now can realize that not only am I the witness of all of this, right? It is able to go back one step further now and see that I am the creator, not just the witnesses of this creation, right? Because prior to that, it has simply been witnessing all of this. You see? Right? It's simply been passive, hasn't it? But then it has the further realization, not only am I the witness of all of this, I have created all of this. All of this is arising out of the spanda of my own consciousness. What he had been calling the other, that he's been passively watching, he realizes not the other at all. It is a reflection of my own consciousness. It is arising in my own witnessing consciousness, much like in a dream. When you go into a dream, Bhakti Maji, right? You enter into a kind of state of consciousness where you witness all that is arising in the dream, don't you? And it's only upon waking that you realize that everything that went on in that dream was arising out of your fundamental consciousness. All of the people in the dream, all of that drama in the dream, all of the dialogue that was going on between the people in the dream, the context of the dream, the place, everything, all was arising out of your own consciousness. All of it was emanations arising out of your own consciousness, don't you? So something like this occurs to that individual who is already pure enough, free enough from that false sense of self. It is like waking up. They simply wake up in that instance. And they have the realization that I am Shiva. I am God. And that all of this is my Leela. All of this is simply a reflection of my own consciousness. That I am the creator, the sustainer, and the destroyer of all of it. And then they lose the experience of the other. It drops off. You see? At the level of the full recovery of your identity as Shiva, and I'm just using that term because Spanda belongs to that school, but any word would do, you know what I mean? But upon full recovery of recognition of oneself as Shiva, the experience of other drops out entirely. There is no other. These are all modifications of myself. With the transcendence of the experience of others, all fear drops away. Because fundamentally, fear is based on the presumption of others being separate from you. Other than you are. Different. Xenophobia is the most classic form of that Consumption isn't it, beloved. People become xenophobic. They become afraid of others. People who suffer from social anxiety disorders. You know what I mean? They can't come out of the house. Or some of them can't even come out of their washrooms. Some of them are locked in the basement in the corner. They don't even have full use of their own facilities and so forth and so on. Driven. The fear of others. And that simply drops out. Totally gone. Intuitively, they recognize it. Self as Shiva. It's like if I hold up these fingers, and some of you already know they're four. You don't. Some of you have to count. 1, 2, 3, 4. You see, some just simply intuitively know. Upon seeing all of this, one intuitively come to the conclusion, I am God. From that witnessing posture, you are able to intuitively conclude and arrive at the recognition of self as God. It is amazing. Now, we'll say some things about it as we go along throughout these discussions. I do not intend to exhaust them today. I certainly want you to have some kind of idea of what to look forward to as you prepare yourself for the path. So the highest means and response to Shaktipat is in the form of this Anupaya. The next one is Sambhava. Upaya. Now, that too is a high response to the grace that removes the veil. It, very similar to the Anupaya, also does not involve any doing in the traditional sense. There's no yoga here yet. There is no meditation. There is no repetitions of mantras. There is none of those things are required for this person at that level to recover recognition. They are able after understanding, after hearing the Dhamma taught, on the sheer basis of will, take that great action that moves them toward full recognition of self as God. Before you can appreciate it, a few things have to be explained. The first thing you have to understand is how you are actually making ego. Think about that. How are you creating your false sense of self as ego? Essentially. Because you have to understand that. This sense of self that you have right now is your own creation. You are moment to moment creating this, aren't you? Aren't you? This is your own activity. You are constantly doing this moment to moment. Now, so we must go into what is that activity? What is the mechanism? Your thoughts, right? You're constantly thinking, aren't you? Right? You are constantly thinking the ego into being. Ego is a mental construct. Is it not? You construct it. Ego is your own conceptualization construction, isn't it, ultimately? You actually construct a concept of self, haven't you? I mean, isn't that essentially what you've done, right? And this construction of your concept of self fundamentally is occurring through thinking, isn't it? Is that about right? And it is characterized by a wrong concept of self. Now, this is the thing you have to understand. As long as you continually think of yourself as being other than God, that is what generates the experience of being an ego. Now, this is something. Now, this is something. This concept, this wrong concept of self, based on your thinking, it's been called the impure mental construct, or the impure vikalpa. The Ashuddha vikalpa. Are you with me so far? The thinking, I am the body. I am my feelings in this moment. I am my history of this body. I am the memories that is associated with this body. That constant thinking that is so, right, is what generates the feeling of ego. And then, of course, it sets up that whole mechanism that is egoity, doesn't it? Right? The whole process begins from there, right? And what the mystics are saying is that you are not that. The mystic come and say that you are not the body, you are not your emotions, you are not all of the contents of your memory and all of that you are Shiva, all right? That you are not this false self that you have been thinking that you are. And that the way out of your condition is to stop thinking that you are this false self. It's interesting. And the person that can make use of that level of the Shakti power out of an act of sheer will can stop thinking that it is ego. Are you following me? They can transcend the thinking process through a sheer act of will. You simply can't do that. At all. If the mystic is saying it is your constant and continuous thinking of yourself as this body-mind and all of the contents and all of the experience associated with the body-mind that is the problem. They said, stop thinking. Transcend the thinking. Transcend that thinking process altogether. Come to that place that is prior to thinking. That's who and where you are. The self-domain. And the person understands. And then through a sheer act of will, transcends the thinking process. And is able in that moment to recover, you see, the witnessing condition and the rest takes off from there. Are you with me so far? Are you with me so far?
Yes, sir.
All right. Now remember, I'm not going to be responsible if you don't get it, and right? You know, if you don't get it. That's what we're here for.
Yes, I'm trying to say I don't think it was governing my life.
Yes. Yes. Your sense of self, you see, beloved, is based on how you think. Right? And as long as you keep thinking of yourself as that very self that you become identified with, you see, that's from, you know, the West Side and born this particular time and has this particular parent and is in that particular body and so forth and so on. As long as you persist in that kind of self-conceptualization process that is based on Maya, then you will suffer and remain a limited being. Yes, beloved.
And this is more than changing your thinking. It's transcending.
It is transcending the whole thinking process. Yes, beloved.
A part of this whole transcendent process has to do with purification, going back to what you talked about at the beginning with purification.
Sure, it'll go back to that ultimately. But you see, at this level, the person that can make use of this is pure enough already. You see my point? They already are sufficiently pure of all of that. That's why I say it's a very high state. You know what I mean? The attachment, you know what I mean? It's not that deep. They are already fundamentally detached. You know what I mean? From that whole false sense of self, to the degree that they can give that up. You simply can't detach yourself from that. You see? Because you really still feel that you are your thinking. You actually feel you are the mind. Your whole level of identification is that I am the mind. And what happened if I transcend this mind? Then I will be no more. And that is your fear. You see? That is your fear. The person that can make right use of Shaktipat at the level of Sambhava Uvaya simply is already sufficiently free of all of that. The purification, beloved, you see, is already very mature in that individual. And just hearing the Dhamma, you see, when they come to the great gurus and mystics, the mystics simply say, "You're God, Bhakti Maji, done." Right? And she said, "Well, how come I'm not having the experience?" The guru said, "Well, Bhakti Maji, just, go beyond your mind and you have it." She says, "Fine, go." Through a sheer act of will. Those are the kind of beings you see that come to the guru and they have instant revelation. There is no obligation. He doesn't initiate her and say, "Okay, now you sit like this and you repeat this mantra and you do that and you do." None of that is necessary for such a being. Abhyasa is for those who don't possess any will power. They don't have the requisite level of will. Now, for those Jews, then you have to resort to some support. You have to give them some aid because of the lack of development of will. They simply cannot will themselves into that condition that transcends thinking. When we talk about transcending thinking, I'm talking about transcending all of this self-concept making process that underlies and is the basis of your sense of ego. Are you all right? You okay? We'll come to these again. This is not an exhaustive discussion, and certainly you are to make right use of your sponsors. So whatever you don't get here, just see your sponsor, and I'm sure that they'll sit with you and help you really fully comprehend it. So the Sambhava Upaya then becomes another level of response to Shaktipat on the basis of that individual's freedom from and detachment from that false sense of self that is ego. These are very highly spiritual beings in the first place, aren't they? Right? They are fit, what we call in the tradition, adinkari. They're fit. They've already have loosened their grip on the false sense of self. Hmm? Yes, beloved.
And I think you told us before, but these souls don't have much karma, right?
They have.
To do with all this too.
Karma also has a lot to do with it, you see. But they have body karma, just like anybody else. They wouldn't be here if they didn't have karma. But you're right in some sense, beloved, because karma could be understood as a expression of a person's level of being fit. All right? People who have bad karma, and I don't mean bad in a very conventional sense. You may be very rich, good looking, and have all of the advantages of conventional life, but your karma is just bad. You're almost unconscious. You know what I mean? You're simply unfit. Or less fit, let me put it like that, than these other jeeves. Many of these people their good karma may be, in a conventional sense, very sad. One of these kinds of beings was Supra Buddha. Supra Buddha lived during the lifetimes of the Buddha, and Supra Buddha was a leopard. And on one occasion, when the Blessed One was gathered with his bhikkhus, giving a Dharma talk, Supra Buddha decided that he would approach the crowd because his profession was a beggar. He's a leper. You see. And so he begged, panhandled. You know what I mean? Must have been a brother, right? Right? So he decided, well, that's a big crowd over there. You know what I mean? He had heard something about the Buddha and all of this. You know, he'll score. Tried to say, I go work the Buddha crowd. And the Blessed One was simply sitting there silently. He had been sitting there for hours, even before Supra Buddha came, just sitting silently with all of the bhikkhus, not saying a word. Because it was Buddha's custom that he would not speak the Dharma until he felt that there was somebody there who could hear it. And thus far, after hours of sitting with hundreds of bhikkhus surrounding him, there still was no one there that could hear the Dharma. And so he simply remained silent. And as the Supra Buddha approached the crowd, you see, the great Lord began to roar that Dhamma. And hearing that Dhamma, Supra Buddha simply attained right on the spot. And then he bowed down to the Buddha from the back. The Buddha bowed down to him, and they both left. So you see, beloved, one never knows what that being's outer circumstances would be. On the one hand, you could say, well, his karma was bad. He had leprosy. You see my point? Then on the other hand, he had excellent karma. So these are the kinds of things that you cannot know anything about. This is one of the great mysteries, isn't it? Right? So you can't calculate it. You know what I mean? You really can't calculate it. You can't say, well, I got a black body, I'm born on the west side, therefore my karma must be such that, you know, I can only make use of that means way down here. You can't really justify that statement at all. So these things are always, you see, great mysteries. You simply cannot calculate them about yourself or others. Rather than try to calculate it, that energy is best used. You know what I mean? Practice. That's why I've said already, you are not going to be able to figure this out. You can't figure it out. the effort to figure it out is simply more waste of energy. Time. So let us return to our consideration of the Sambhava level of the means for the recovery of recognition of self as God. And we can begin to see now that if we, as individual beings, possess that level of adhikari, then our goal of being on the path would have already been accomplished by now, wouldn't it? Right? Is that right? You see? And the reason why it's good to understand these typologies so that you don't become confused, that you don't get lost in your own mythology, because you will bring so much mythology to the path. You will start thinking that you are this and you are that, you know what I mean? And in that false thinking, you will not make right use of the means that have been given you, because you think that, well, these means are for low order beings, not for me, Bhagwan, but they're for you. You see, you will want some kind of unique and exceptional sadhana given you, but this is the sadhana for you, because you're not one of those unique beings. So I'm sharing with you some of the qualities of those unique beings so that you may know this now and become humbled to the point of making right use of the means that are made available to you. And it is good that we're having this talk with seekers, because that's what most seekers suffer, seeker disease. You know what I mean? Right? It is the feeling that, man, I am somehow more spiritually talented than these fools around Bhagwan. Look at these fools. Is that right, Mike Saab? I know you must say it 1,000 times. Look at these fools. He just said that. He just answered that question. This fool is answering the same question that they asked last week. What's wrong with them? Don't they listen? I mean, I understand. Right? And you hear their lamentations about their meditation. He says, I can't understand. What can be so hard about that? You just sit. Shouldn't be no problem. But that is seeker disease. And if we do not cure it, then it turns into the disciple disease. Because even once they become initiated, they still think that they can do something other than the practice that I've given them. They still think. That they are an exceptional being. And then so much time and energy is spent wallowing in that level of their own self-deception and mythology, you see. Sambhava Upaya simply is that form of grace that can be made right use of only by very highly evolved souls in the first place. Who are simply capable of transcending the mental mechanism that generates the false sense of self in the first place. And to do that simply by a sheer act of will. Pull up from it. And in that moment stand free of ego. step into the witnessing. And then from there, step on further. We will say more. The next one is called Shakti, Upaya. Because what becomes the means for the recovery of and the realization of self as God for those of us who cannot transcend thinking? Is there any hope for us? You hope so, right? better be right. Has the Lord forgotten about us? Because we hear the Dhamma, and we simply can't do that. We're simply limited, trapped. We do not have the spiritual ability to do that. Because remember that your sadhana, the upaya that is appropriate for you, is somehow related to your ability. And most of us is not that spiritually talented. We don't have that kind of spiritual capacity and capability. It is not flattering. It even goes against our mythology. But it is simply the case. And one of the things that every new initiate finds out when they enter into the full practice is they realize how untalented they really are. And it's humiliating. It is embarrassing. It is painful. It is the deep, dark secret that we all keep, even from each other. When we're sitting in the morning time, we are in direct touch with our individual level of incompetence, lack of talent, and capacity. And it doesn't feel good. That's why at satsang we have food. They made so the food to help you feel better. We sing, Guru Murti makes songs and Kusas sing. We try to add a festive element to it, cause I understand the depression is there. You just came from meditation this morning. You all depressed. It's a depressing experience when you really encounter your spiritual reality. And you find that I simply cannot transcend this mind and this thinking process at all. Try as I may. And so the gurus, the mystics, out of their infinite wisdom, out of their genius, was able to come up with a means that will lead to a full realization, even for those who are not able to transcend the mind in this thinking process. They say, well, okay, since you cannot transcend thinking, think differently in terms of the self. That's interesting, isn't it? Since you can't transcend thinking, think differently of yourself. And they were very specific. One of the means that they give us the mantra. But by mantra, of course, I don't mean the kind of unconscious, blind, and mechanical muttering of words that you are accustomed to doing. That's not using a mantra correctly. Mantras are really words that are symbols and reminders of your divine nature. By remembering these words, Simran. Simran means to remember, to repeat, and to remember. There's two things going on when you're doing Simran, when you're repeating the mantra. You're repeating a word, symbol, and you're remembering it, right? So mantras then are words or phonetic sound symbols that reminds you of some divine aspect of your true self. A mantra. Now, those of you who have been fully initiated, of course, have been given mantras, and I've had all of this kind of conversation with you, and I will have it with you all again, too. But since you have no mantra now, I am just simply making you aware of it, so that when we do have the conversation somewhere down the road, you will be able to pick up right from here. But the point is that when you repeat a mantra is a word that reminds you of your divine aspect. So when you repeat that mantra, you're actually remembering. Your own divinity. Right? You're thinking of your own divinity. There's a law that governs the realm of thinking, is that you become that on which you meditate. Meditate. And by meditate, I mean focus attention, hold the attention on. You become that on which you hold your attention. Literally. But think about it. Look at the behavior of your attention ordinarily. Right? Don't you experience only that which you put your attention on? Is that about right? I mean, really now, don't patronize me. Is that right? Yeah. Right? That your attention, the modes of attention, the senses, right? The five senses, even at this level, in this mind body, are simply modes and categories of attention, isn't it? Right? I can move my attention in any of the senses, right? Remove my attention, the senses are as lifeless as this body. Are they not? Is that about right? There is no seeing independent of my attention, is it? Is there any hearing independent of my attention? Is there any feeling and taste and so forth? Those are not faculties that stand independent of my attention. It is my attention that generates these experiences that I'm having through the five senses, isn't it? Right? And when the attention is fully focused on anything, that becomes your experience. You become that thing, literally. Are you following me? It is by virtue of me putting my attention in this body, I become the body. It's interesting, isn't it? You become that on which you meditate, on which you focus your attention, on which you hold your attention. And so the mantra creates a kind of ista for you. Ista means your highest self-concept as God. Right? And by holding your attention on that, by meditating on that, you become that. By meditating on the divine self as God, you become God. It is a profound thing. It is a profound thing. But the attention must be held on that. So I'm not talking about philosophizing. I'm not talking about reflective thinking. I'm not talking about analyzing. I'm not talking about any of that. I'm talking about the holding of attention. All right? That's a very different thing, isn't it? You're not philosophizing, are you? You're not contemplating as such. You know what I mean? You are creating mental constructions of a very different nature, aren't you? Instead of creating the mental construction that is the false self, you create the mental construction that is the divine self. All right? And then you meditate that. And that becomes a means. And what it does, it liberates you from the false sense of self. Right? It is what I used to call, it's removing a thorn with a thorn. It is beautiful, isn't it? Right? So somehow you've managed to use the mind, right? In a way, right? To go beyond its own self. It's become like a ladder, right? You have been able to transcend that kind of thinking, right? That was the problem in the first place, haven't you? Right? And so one of the means for that is mantra, mantra yoga. It's a very different level of practice than what you see ordinarily going on in the practice of most disciples and in most places where meditation is taught, so forth and so on, which is just a blind, mechanical muttering of words, which is meaningless and does not lead to anything at all. No realization is coming out of that. You can repeat om, 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 om. Yeah, that's all that's happening. You know what I mean? That's all that's happening. And that's not mantra yoga at all. You see. It is not a part of the Chakti Uvaya at all. You see. It is simply a sign that that is a means for which you are not capable of making right use of. There are some other means associated with that level of Shaktipat in the response to grace that those jivas are capable of responding to, besides mantra. There's satakar, wisdom. Wisdom. Pure reasoning. Here you're making use now of the faculties themselves. And I won't go into all of them, but there's the buddhi, right? Then there's manas. Of course, there's chit. There's ahamkara. Ahamkara. We're about the spellings. You can get them all from your sponsors. This form of the Shakti Upaya now make use of these things. All of these are making use of these things. They're used as to aid you. And in the practice of satakar, what the person is making use of now is pure reasoning. They're still thinking, right? But now that thinking is purified of all of his illogical behavior, its irrationality, right? It is strained, right? It is purified and turned into wisdom. The principal means here is samyama, isn't it? The process is the consideration. Samyama. Samyama means the focusing of intelligence onto an issue to the point of revelation. It is the disciplining of intelligence. So now you see, and that means the individual stands back and they look at all of this. And they enter into a very disciplined process of reasoning. Now, I have gone over that in one of the other classes with your sponsors. I would say just a little bit about it here. We've already said that whatever literature we read in the world, we find that they all describe God as possessing certain powers and performing certain functions. And that's true right across the board pretty much, isn't it? You don't see that varying at all. Almost every scripture says the same. That God creates, preserves, destroys. We'll just stick with those three. That is God's power. We have called it Shakti in the Chavad tradition, that's all. The power through which God creates has been called Shakti. Those three powers are often referred to as, in at least that tradition that we're speaking of today, is Ika, it's Jhana, it's Kriya. Will, knowledge, action. That through its will, its infinite will, it simply creates. And wherever we have heard of any kind of description of God, God has been described as that which simply have willed existence into being. Period. We have also been told that it is the knower of that which it has created as well. Right? Omniscient. Jhana. It knows. It is the universal subject of the universal object. It's interesting, isn't it? It wills universal objects and objective experience, and it is the universal subject and knower of all those things. Allah is the best knower, because Allah is the only knower. To phrase it in the nomenclature of Islam. Kriya, doer, action. That God is the doer of all things. There is no other doer. And this is true across the scriptures. Sanyama, the principal discipline that makes up Satakar, is looking at all of this. To now really pay attention to the manifest universe of your own experiences, just as it is. Just as it is. There's to be no kind of imagination going on here. Looking at things exactly the way things are appearing to be. Looking at your perceptions, right? Both gross and subtle, high and low. Looking at them. you begin to now find their origin. You begin to look and see where is everything coming from out here, and that is in the realm of my experience. You're looking closely at it. Just as it is. Just your ordinary day-to-day experiences. You don't have to run to no Himalaya caves nowhere. Just looking. You don't have to pick up no book, no nothing. You see? You're just looking. But with the degree of samyama. You see? At the very nature of your own experiences right now. And what you begin to notice is that, like God has been defined as the possessor of these powers, because whoever possesses these powers is God. Is that about right? Now you have to work with this a little bit. You have to work with this a little bit. Whoever possesses these powers, God by definition is that which possesses these powers. Is that about right? So that whichever possesses the powers of God is God on the basis of definition from the scriptures, from the authorities. They have also said the same thing about God. Not just the scriptures, the gurus, the sages, and everybody else has said the same thing, right? So you observe and you see, well, now, you begin to see how everything is ultimately traced back to your own consciousness. You begin to explore all of your experiences, dream, not just the waking state. You understand? You look at them all. Because you are having experience in three basic modes, aren't you? The waking condition, dream, and deep dreamless sleep. Are you not? All right? And you're inspecting this very closely now. And what you begin to see, that in the waking state, just like in the dream state, this stuff is arising out of your own consciousness. You begin to see that ultimately, I am the possessor of these powers. I am the possessor. You see? It is out of my own act of free will that I have experienced it. You see? You find your intention is to have experience. Aren't you intending to have experiences? Don't you right? You're intending this all, aren't you? It's very intentional, isn't it? It's not against your will, is it? Right? You intentionally have experience. And who is the knower of the experiences? And you're also the doer in all of this. That's right. You begin to see this most profoundly. Now, of course, I'm not going to pace you through a sanyama, classically speaking, but I want you to begin to locate sanyama in the scale of things and see that it is too a part of the Shakti Upaya. It's the additional support that is offered to those of us who simply cannot transcend thinking. So it teaches you how to think clearly. It consists of developing a high degree of what the mystics have called vavika. Vavika. The ability to discriminate between the real and the unreal. That's vavika. Right? That's vavika. And by entering into a deep process, in a deep consideration, in a profound focusing of intelligence, you come to the conclusion that I am Shiva, you see? And not this false self, this false sense of self, this ego that I have been priorly considering myself to be, that I am really the possessor of all of the Shakti. And he whoever possesses the Shakti is Shiva. Because everywhere that we have ever seen God mentioned, God has been that which possesses the Shakti. You don't find the two separate. They are what we call in the Sanyama business concomitant phenomena, right? Just like wherever there's smoke, there's always what? You never find one without the other, do you? They are concomitant. You see? They're concomitant phenomena, right? Shiva and Shakti are concomitant, right? You don't find power where you don't find its possessor. That never happens, right? You don't find experience where you do not find a possessor of those experiences and the ability to make those experiences. And so through this process, one recovers recognition. And this is technically the method that is associated with prati vijana, the recognition of God. It's the recognition and the recovery of self as God through transcendental argument. It is called the Transcendental argument. And in Buddhism, this was one of the principal forms of upaya that Buddha offered. The Buddha would give the progressive talk to those who came that was fit. What he called the Arya Savakas, the noble ones, the noble souls. And he will give them a progressive talk, which simply means he will present the transcendental argument to them for their consideration. And then they will take that argument and they will go into retreat with it. And it is said, at least in the Buddhist canon, that after 3 to 7 days in the retreat, the bhikkhu will simply emerge enlightened, that they attain enlightenment in 7 days. You can begin to see that that's a whole different level and species of seeker, isn't it? Right? You've been thinking that, well, they're going to take 4 lifetimes. Well, that tells us something about us, doesn't it? But it is interesting to note that in the times of the Buddha, as well as many of these other great sages and seers, that wasn't the case. Those that attained the enlightenment around the Buddha, 3-7 days. Some like Super Buddha on the spot. Those who could not attain simply became the Puttajanas, those who worked on their karma, worked on better lives for the next, incarnation. They became the gatherers of merit. You see? The Puttajanas. But there were those who could make right use of the intellect and so forth and so on, to discipline it, focus it, purify it, attained avika, and was able to see that which is real, as opposed to simply seeing that which was not real. They could see that I really am Shiva. That's the reality. And what is unreal is that I am not Shiva. They were able to have the vision that aham, idam, idam, aham. I am the universe, this universe is me. And to recover that recognition. So far, so good? All right, then. How's my time? Gurumurti? 20 minutes. You have a second cassette?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Gurudas is relieved to hear that. All right. Let us continue then. So we talked about the mantra as one of the means associated with the Shakti upaya. We talked about satakara, There's another one. Spanda. Now remember, even though I've used the word mantra and satakara and so forth, I want you to understand there's still no abhyasa and sadhana in the sense that you know it. That has not even happened yet. All right? I want you to be clear. I want you to be clear on this here. You see? The Guru still does not have to give them the kind of sadhana that you have. Because, you see, you don't have this level of practice of mantra. You see my point? At all. And you simply are not capable at this point in your time, in your development, to really do any sanyama. You can't see it. Even when you try to do sanyama, you can't see it. I say, go do this sanyama. All right, you go do your sanyama, you come back. All right? And it is as if you saw nothing, at least on the basis of your actions. All right? It remains the same. You remain unchanged. You go and you philosophize. That's what you go do, and psychologize. You don't do no sanyama. Because sanyama is a much higher level of practice than most of you all are capable of doing. So I want you to be clear. We still have not gotten down to your level of sadhana yet. But the Guru normally gives all of them. He'll start with the highest and work down from there. That has been the tradition. So you have heard most of these things already. I am just revisiting them again with you in a more structured way. Certainly one of the third subsidiary levels of Sakti Upaya concerns Spanda itself. Now, I've already defined Spanda as this vibration of consciousness. That is, consciousness vibrates. It is simply displaying all and illustrating all of the powers of God, isn't it? All of that is going on. In that expansion, there is creation, perseverance, right? Then when the expansion reaches its zenith, it begins to reverse its direction and you get destruction, right? So you got this constant creation, this preserving destruction process going on, right? That is the Spanda. And I've already told you that in the Spanda Yoga, what the Spanda yogi does now is devote their attention to watching this rhythm of consciousness. This is interesting. In Satakara, you by applying very rigorous intelligence, you're able to reason and come to the conclusion, aren't you? Right? Here, you're using attention. You're not even using reasoning here. See how beautiful this is? They've made all kinds of ways possible for us. You may not be able to think that clearly. Yeah, that may be more than you can do. Okay, well, can you pay attention then? And in Spanda Yoga, it said, simply pay attention, a close attention to the rhythm and the pulsation of consciousness. Because consciousness is the creator, the sustainer, and the destroyer of every level and form of your experience. Now, pay attention then to this pulsation. Watch the cycles closely. And in Spanda Yoga, it says pick anything. That's the beauty of it. Pick any experience. Pick any perception that you're having. Pick anything. Doesn't matter. You see? Pick it. Watch it. Focus attention on it. And then what you will find is that here you have the ground of Spanda. And something arrives from there. It peaks, is that about right? Then it descends, right? And it falls back into its Spanda, doesn't it? The ground of the Spanda. the ground of his being, the source of his being. All right? And that's true of any event. Any event. Any perception. All perceptions return to the ground of perception. All right? All perception returns to consciousness at its ground level, doesn't it? And Spanda Yoga says, watch anything that you are perceiving. Hold the perception. Stay with it. And this perception, this perceived event, person, place, thing, experience, sensation, doesn't matter what it is, will follow the pattern, will follow the law, and it will drop back down into its origin. And with its fall, just by riding that with your attention comes right back down to the ground of being. Are you following me? You attach your attention to a perception, hold it on that perception, until that perception drops back down into the ground of consciousness. And you'll ride right in there. You see? And then you will see another wave will rise. And they said you could do it with, the classic practice is with your thoughts. Because again, we're dealing with how to deal with your thinking, right? If you can now just watch what you're thinking. Isn't that interesting? In Buddhism, they call it vipassana. Watch what you're thinking. Just watch thinking. Don't even try to shut it down. Don't try to do none of that. Just watch it. Just watch the thinking. Watch any thought. If you can't even watch a set of thoughts, watch a thought. All right? Watch it. And that thought will arise, it will endure, and it will fall. And they said, therefore, in Spanda Yoga, you find that gap between your thinking. Right. The thinking will fall. The thought will actually fall into that gap between the next thought. You see? But you must pay very close attention. You see? Because thoughts are moving so fast. So fast. Thoughts move just as everything out in the physical universe, because of light, is being a means of aiding your physical eyes and seeing. Therefore, everything out here approximates the speed of light. It's not so on the inside. Things slow down. Only the lowest level of vibration is at the speed of light inside. The speed of light and up. So your thoughts are traveling faster than the speed of light. So you can begin to imagine the sophistication and level of attention that you must practice. Yes, beloved.
So when I'm sitting down and I'm thinking, I'm perceiving that I'm having more than one thought at a time. That's not really the case. They're moving. There's actually gaps in between the thoughts. It's moving so fast.
Yes. Yes, you may have one thought, you may have a constellation of thoughts. It could be many things, you see. But the reality is that all of them are discrete, even for them to rise and come together. See, what happened is, Arjuna Sap, it is manas. Manas is that part of the inner faculties and consciousness that form concepts. That's what manas does. It takes data coming in. The buddhi, it is the buddhi just picks up all data, all of that. The buddhi just registers everything. It is the apparatus of cognition. It just registers everything, comes into the buddhi, right? It is at the level of manas now that it forms concept out of that, right? You see, because otherwise you simply cannot even handle all of that stuff rushing in on you, right? So it forms a concept, right, out of that stuff. And these become the mental concept, the thoughts and so forth and so on, right? And I'm simply saying at this level of the practice, right? Even to just take a concept, any concept. Any group of thoughts that makes up a concept, doesn't matter, because they too will obey the law. But what you will find, beloved, is that thoughts are rising, they're there for a while, and then they move on. You'll find the same is the case with your feelings. You always feel in a certain way, for a while, and then that is replaced by another feeling, and so forth and so on. And that's even down to the cellular level. You see? That is the first noble truth, law, isn't it? That there is impermanence. And that is so. And then you become capable of seeing this. Spanda yoga is observing this law of impermanence at any level that you're capable of. So if you can't observe at the subtle level, fine. You know what I mean? There will be other means available now. And that'll take us into the next level of discussion. But somebody had a comment? Yes, beloved.
At the level of awareness where we are, what generally happens is that we don't see the arise. We see it as it is.
Yes.
Therefore, it's like difficult to
Sure.
ride it
Sure.
because we don't catch it as it comes.
You
We see it after it has come into being.
you're almost having a delayed effect. You know what I mean? An after effect. You see, what they call a samskar, an impression. You see? But you're absolutely right, Buddhadasa. You see, we don't see it arising. Right? And so the first level of the practice, you just must catch it in arising. Impulses and all of that. Impulses, thoughts, everything. Everything that arises. Yes, beloved?
Now, at the spanda is where the gap occurs.
Yes.
That is what really where things happen.
That's where thoughts are arising from.
That
You
is
see?
where the concentration, though, you said that that's where one concentrates.
You won't be able to get to the spanda. You will have to actually ride the thought. You will actually have to attend to the thought and hold your attention on the thought and not let your attention be distracted off of that thought. And then you must ride that thought, that impulse or what have you, all the way through the cycle. And in that riding of that impulse or thought all the way through the cycle, it will fall. It will come automatically back to the ground of being, to consciousness. This is consciousness. You see? This is consciousness. And that whole thing is the spanda of consciousness, isn't it? It's a sine wave. For those who remember that trig, it's a sine wave. Right? So that's how energy waves looks. They're a sine.
For lack of being in between this rising and falling, and that's where God is. That's where the gap is.
That's right. This is where God is at. You see? So when you say that you want to know God, you have to come to this level. Right? You have to come to this level. These are modifications. They're God too, but at another level. Let's say something briefly about the next level, and then let's take a break and get ready for a little practice, because theory without practice is meaningless, isn't it? Right? So we always must have a little practice here. And then later on, we'll have a little time to discuss it all. And then, of course, you always have your sponsors who will be more than happy to fill in any areas that I have left blank. There is another level of practice now, and another means of practice. Because what happens if a person is so lacking in talent and ability and spiritual capacity to even be able to objectify the activity going on in themselves at the level of their mind? What can we do for them? Because there will be many who simply cannot deal with anything at the lower mind. That's beyond their capacities. Now we home. Who simply have no talent or any capacity to deal with any of the subtle movements of thought. Who simply cannot feel any of that. They have no access to that level of subtlety at all. They can't do Spanda, because Spanda is about watching thoughts. And like Junasab said, you know, that stuff is moving so fast, he don't even know what's going on. You see, it's just a blur, you know. So now, just as we have made use of the inner apparatuses in consciousness at the level of the Shakti Upaya, the Buddhi, the Manas, Ahamkara, and so forth and so on. Now, in addition to that, for the individual who cannot make use of any of those means associated at that level, they need more support than just these things. You see? So now we have to come to the body. All right? So at the next level, at the Anava Upaya, in addition to all of the other forms of support, we now have to resort to the body. The dead. We have to resort to the body now as an additional means of helping them. Say, for instance, the Spanda practice deteriorates to the watching of breath because you simply don't have the capacity to watch thoughts. So here, watch your breath. First, it's inner breath. Even in high Anava Upaya, it's the inner breath that is washed. And I don't mean the breath of the body. I mean it's the breath, the breathing at the level of the mind. But if you can't do that, then okay. You know what I mean? You watch these breaths, you see? And so forth and so on. The prana, as they call it, you see? And I won't go into all of that. Most of you know something about pranayama yoga and so forth and so on. But you begin to see how the practice has been stepped down to a level that it gives the usual and average individual an opportunity to be helped. Some cannot even watch, you know, the breath. They don't have enough capacity and awareness to even, and control over their attention to even discipline it to watch the breathing in the body. You see, as it leaves the nostrils and touches the nostrils and so forth and so on. So with them, they're told, just watch the rise and fall of your damn navel. Surely you should be able to do that, right? I mean, it deteriorates, doesn't it, right? So here you could get pranayama yoga. And then past gone yugas, it was one of the principal means and forms of the Anava Upaya. But even in pranayama yoga today, there's so few people that are even capable of doing that because pranayama yoga requires a great training. You see, the diet has to be changed. You have to do dhoti and kote, which is cleaning out all these nadis and inner vessels. What the old mystic would do, they would take cloths, you see, and you would swallow the cloth, you see, and clean the stomach passage. You would pass them through your nose and through your rectum. I mean, it was a real ordeal. You would have to practice a very rigorous diet, you see, and the body will have to be put through a whole series of practices associated with hatha yoga to just get it in the condition to do pranayama yoga, right? So even in this yuga, this Kali Yuga, there's almost nobody fit even for pranayama yoga at all. So, in addition to pranayama yoga, they have given us also the practice of diet, so forth and so on. But here's an interesting one. They're giving us the practice of what they call the Shabbat de Nam. Shabyo. Very interesting. Because there is something in the body. The body is always producing sound. Sound. One of the things that you find out is that this Spanda produces a sound. So even if you cannot watch a scene, a thought, a breath, and so forth and so on, if you can listen to the sound of Spanda, if you can focus your attention on the sound of the Spanda, that too will carry you. And you can begin at the level of the body. And so there are sounds inside of this body, the Shabbat Denam, sounds inside of the body, the nada. And by focusing your attention on that, you're able to move to the ground of its, from which it is arising. Now, in our tradition, we have called this practice bhajan. Bhajan. Yes, beloved.
Is that why the sounds are different? Because the sound will change because it's following.
Yes, you can. Signing, that sine wave. That's why you hear it. And when you get here, back to the ground of consciousness, there's simply no sound, no Shabbat. It is the source from which Shabbat arises. You see. They have called it the Anahat Shabbat, the unstruck sound. And so we've talked about that among ourselves, and of course, those of you who are newly come into the path, your sponsors will make you aware of that when that time is appropriate, and so forth and so on. So this Shabbat Denam, you see, becomes one of the primary and most potent means that is available for those of us who lack the talent, the capacity for self-awareness that is associated with the other higher levels of the upayas. And what you will find over time, of course, is that a little of all of the upayas is offered. So they're not all cut and dry. Are you following me? You see, they kind of cascade into each other. But I certainly want you to have an idea of some of the basic features of the whole culture of spiritual development, so that you will enjoy the distinction between spiritual development and personal ego development, where you are coming to improve on yourself. And I simply want you to understand, coming to the path means that we're going to undo yourself. It's going to be quite the opposite experience. And if you don't know that up front, then it can become a very frustrating experience for you, because you will be doing everything to cling to your false sense of self in this perpetuation, and I will simply be doing everything in my power to undo all of that. And so we'll be in war. I'll become your greatest enemy. You see, right? Mantra. Again, there's another level of mantra that is available at this level. You see my point? And at this level of repeating the mantra, you're listening to the sound of the mantra. Because you simply can't practice mantra at a higher level, right? That I've mentioned about before. But when you repeat it, it immediately reminds you of your real nature as Shiva, and you attain. When you repeat the name, nothing happens like that. You see? So for you, focus on the sound, the Shabbat of it, the sound of it. The mantra is a sound. Hear it. Hear it. Pay attention via hearing. What we have called, in our tradition, surat. Use that capacity and consciousness to hear. There's another capacity in consciousness that we learn to discipline. That's called nidit. That means to see. But you'll begin to find that attention flows through the body-mind system primarily in these two forms, surat in the form of hearing, and nidit in the form of seeing. And the mystics have even broken it down. I think about 80 3% of your attention flows through Nirit. What is it, 14 here? And I think the other remaining percentage is distributed over the rest of the body. So we're disciplining here. So we engage this natural flow of attention in the body-mind in the form that is suited. And we listen to the Shabad Dinam, you see, and we listen to the mantra. It's a natural place where you're already at. The Nirit, you use Dhyan, and we will be talking about that next. Dhyan. Now, even this is level can only be accessed by marked souls. Well, what if you're not a marked soul? Then we still can help you. It ain't over with, right? There's still hope, right? You see, now we can give you religion. You see, we can give you the worship of idols. You see, I mean, there's all kinds of means for everybody. Rituals, ceremony, superstition, that kind of a thing. Because some people have to be scared straight. Nothing else will work. So you have to say, well, you're going to go to hell, or you're going to, something. We have to use the fear that characterizes you. Because you operate out of fear. So we got to do something with your fear, right? So if I can realign your fear, then we can make a whole means out of that, can't we? Right? So we get your fear, right? Going to hell, and you're going to be boiling, the old fire and brimstone approach becomes great, right? If you cannot do Dhyan, and we still have not said much about that, I will, because I want to offer it to some of you to begin with. But Dhyan is basically about using your attention in the form of Nirit by focusing it onto the form of the Guru, you see? Where the Guru now, the Guru's bodily form becomes a symbol for you, a place for you to rest your attention. And as you rest your attention on the form of the Guru, then that form begins to go through the process of Spanda. It's very interesting, 3 minutes. Good. So by focusing your attention on the form of the Guru, not the whole body of the Guru, just the Guru's eyes and the Guru's forehead, just focusing your attention there, visualizing that, seeing that. And if you are able to hold the attention there, to meditate the attention there, then that whole process of Spanda begins, you see? And that bodily form of the Guru will begin to go through the Spanda. It will start moving through the cycle. But I want you to understand that the whole purpose of Dhyan is simply to enable the individual who doesn't have the means and abilities to still engage themselves in a upaya that will lead ultimately to self-realization and recognition of self as God. So at this time, it's good that you've done. I'm done anyway. It's in there now? Oh, it's rolling now. All right, then. What I know that there's some of you here who already have a system of practice. I believe, Arlene, beloved, you have your own system of practice. So during the time of our practice, that is what you should do. All right? And I think for those who are left here, then what I want you to do is to practice a certain way. Now, Arlene, what I'm going to need to do, beloved, at the risk of being rude to you, I'm going to need you to, where's the food at? Fix her a plate. Let her start eating. But I need you to just give us a little privacy would that be all right? Okay, then. Then is nobody there a place she can go to? It's in the basement or something?
You want the camera on?
Yes, you should take the camera down, too. longer feel this body, it simply drops out as a component in your sense of identification in a way that no reading of a book can ever apply. You can go on other to the inner time. I'm not my body, I'm not my body, but you are totally engrossed with the level of feeling in this body. You feel like this body. You feel like this body. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, so I wouldn't feel like I was this body. I wouldn't have feel the pain of let this body die. I wouldn't feel the pain going through the legs.
That's right. All of that was because of attention.
Yes, my conscience was
Right. You see, attention is what picks up experience. That's what we were saying. You become that which you meditate on in the sense that you put your attention on it, right? You see? And there's nothing wrong with it. Don't misunderstand me. The body has a legitimate function, but you simply should not be trapped in it, right? You should be able to animate it. You see, it will, but not be trapped. Not simply be limited. To have options. Now, of course, if you withdraw the attention most radically and profoundly from this body simply drops dead. That's what death is. It's the absolute withdrawal of attention from this physical body. When you break that silver cord, then this body simply drops dead. Dead, of course, simply being the case where it is no longer animated by the attention, by consciousness. That's why, beloved, very often as you get into it, you start experiencing all of the symptoms that mimic death and dying. The pain in the limbs, in the extremities of the body. That's just how the pain arises during the time of death. So actually is also will aid and abet you in that moment when you must confront the great karmic event that is your death and your dying. This very ability to take your attention off the pain of this body will serve you well. Yes, yes. But that's the first challenge, isn't it? Perhaps we could say that there's a challenge that may even be more fundamental than the withdrawal of attention from the body, and that's just the withdrawal of attention from environment. The sounds, the noise, and so forth and so on. You see? I remember one of the brothers that sponsored me onto the path, and I remember getting on the path, and you know, after a couple of weeks of practicing, you begin to notice all kinds of weird stuff be going on through the time of meditation, and I was complaining to him about, you know, something, you know, must be going wrong with my head because, you know, I'm hearing all kinds of little noises and you know, I mean, I can hear dogs barking 10 miles away. I never had that city before, you know, never had that ability. And I said, well, you know, what's going on? And he laughed, of course. He said that that's a strange thing because when you start practicing, you can even hear electricity running through wires, meaning that you're going to hear every little damn thing. You know, because your attention is not fully withdrawn from environment. So we withdraw from environment to the body, then from the body. The next level of the struggle is at the level of our